Hey everybody. We'll give a moment for everybody to log on. Well, 10 minutes. Or thereabouts. Evening, Chris. Oh, Miles. Miles. Cat is already up here. Hey, Martin. Miles has been all over me today. Hey, Dina, Eric, Heather, and Jeff. Hey, Diane. Hey, Diane. Yep, I was there. Hey, Kathy. Yeah, I got dried up all right. Hey, Susan, Dina. Hey, Mom. Hey, Karen. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Timothy, Susan. Hey, Liz over on YouTube. Hey, Jenna. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Evelyn. Hey, Luann. Paula. James. Hey, Brian. Hey, Jean. Evening, Vicky. Christine. Hey, Ann. Hey, Katie. Hey, Mary. Welcome, everybody, especially anybody new. We do this pretty much every week. Might miss a couple of them coming up. Hey, Laura over on YouTube. Hey, Rebecca. I gotta be on the road a little bit. Yes, yeah, and they quoted the other guy about lots of stuff. Clarence says a lot of stuff that I wouldn't. Oh, yeah, MJ, that should be PM. We'll get that fixed. Stat. Miles? Miles is especially down for some attention today. Miles? See? And that is fixed. Hey, Emily, Mona. Hey, Jan. Hey, Sari. On the train, all right. Hey, Marcia. Hey, Kim. Yeah, Kim, that's going to happen. A lot of people absolutely will insist against any evidence to the contrary that all of the torture chamber rooms were for real. Including the ones that nobody mentioned till the 1940s. And hey, Lucian. Had some interesting comments on TikTok about it. But it's alright. Hey, nice, Jeffrey. Miles. Miles? Really? Hello, Karen. Hey, Larry. Miles is being particularly frisky tonight. Hey, Kathleen. No, that's entirely right. Seeing a lot of that stuff now. It's like people decided the weird part of Tumblr was real life. Weird part of Tumblr 10 years ago.
Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
My guess is because it's so dry in here, I forgot to refill all the radiator pants. And that'll do it. Hey, Charlene in Woodridge. Only neighborhood of Cedar contemporary houses that I know of in Chicago is in Woodridge, I believe. Hey, Ann. Howdy, Karen in South Bend. Hey, Janice in Lockport. Hey, Sherry, welcome back. Hey, Michelle, this is Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel. Hey, Amy and Belinda, Susan. Hey, Becky. Those of you new here, don't forget to look up the mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club Facebook group, where everybody goes to hang out. Joyce, I am drinking myself some Jepson's bourbon. Z21. Hey, Kathy, glad to have you. I'll tell the stars above you, and I love you with all my heart. The fact that the words fart and pee rhyme with so many things. This is the enemy of the smart parody songwriter. But occasionally one can indulge. And Sherry in sunny Seattle. There's actually a light snow falling in Chicago right now. It was last time I went clear to the window. Karen, hey Sally.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets
hey,
a
Dad.
lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Well, so your allergies kicking too, or is it just that it's so dry in here because I forgot to refill the radiator fans? Amy, I have not run into a grave with the name Fart, I don't think. They probably would have changed it a long time ago. It's not like that word is new. I mean, it is centuries old. It's in Canterbury Tales, I know. Probably in Old English, too. Hey, Joanne. Over on YouTube, Joanne. There, the bourbon is delicious. This is the Z21, which is my very favorite. The Z31 is my favorite. Now, this is good. Oh, yeah, tomorrow's Foolery Day. Wonderful. I'm still going to be busy with a ghost writing project that should keep me through the end of the week. I do hope Facebook doesn't shut us out. If the music too loud, I'll lower it down a bit. I do have it up a bit harder than usual. Yeah, Bella, congrats. Hey, Scotty. Hey, Lori in Milwaukee. You haven't seen 7th grade humor on my tours? Oh, no, no, you haven't seen anyone named Fart. Haven't run into one. Hey, Deborah. Hello, Janine. There's usually some 7th grade humor on my tours. It's part of why I don't do more modern stories than I do. I mean, for morning mini tours, the lipstick killer murders were all like really in my neighborhood. It'd be a real easy commute, but not too soon.
When they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
Hey, Cindy. Hey, Scotty. We'll let Benny Goodman get through another tune here. Right at 8 o'clock, a lot of people tend to show up. Hi to anybody new, especially. Well, maybe that's what I'll do for tomorrow. Do I do a Bohemian National tour? No, Lisa, I've never done a full tour there. I've done a lot of like little individual mini tours there. Eleanor in your hospital roomie, glad to have you both. Hey, Grandma Belle. Evening, Casey. Hey, Bob. Hey, Steve over on YouTube. Yeah, Sarah, I'll believe it. I love the guy. There's a Rose Hill Cemetery grave for Richard Pick, for Dick Pick. Thanks, Trish. The second anniversary of virtual tours was a couple of days ago. So we're into year 3 now. Wow. What type of phone do I use for the mini tours? It's an iPhone. Howdy, Joanne. Can you eat anything with ketchup on it? Yeah, sure. There's not a lot of blood in these stories, really. He was a poisoner. What is swirling around my cubes? I have no cubes. Heather, not only is Harry sex at Oakwood, there is a sex bench in the plot. Hey, Jim. Hey, Jennifer. We're letting Benny Goodman finish up this song, then we'll get started properly. Hey, Beth. I was wondering if we get anybody over from the new TikToks. The truth is, he was bad. But not quite as comic book bad as people tend to make him out to be. Or as the urban legends state. All right, it's time to hit pause on the Benny Goodman. We'll have that back for the post-show hangout later on. Welcome along, everybody. Those asking about Priya, the other cat, she is sitting over in the chair nearby here. She just perked right up when I mentioned her name, so maybe we'll see her later on. But I think it is time we go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. Welcome especially everybody new. I've been trying to plug this one on TikTok since I got on there. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, the brand new Murder Maps USA, out now from Thames and Hudson. Coming this August will be Graceland Cemetery, the book. And most relevant for tonight is the big one, HH Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. Came out about almost exactly 5 years ago now. Wow. So welcome along, everybody. The H.H. Holmes stuff was a result of years and years of digging through this guy's paperwork. So it was one of the first virtual tours that I put together, in fact. Just over 2 years ago, for fairly obvious reasons, I started doing virtual tours, and they caught on pretty well. So we ended up doing them all through the pandemic, and even though we're pretty much on the other side of it now, I don't want to get ahead of myself there, but we're able to do walking tours again. But we're still doing virtual tours. We do virtual tours every morning at 10 o'clock on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook. Then we do full-length tours on Sundays at 10 a.m. and Thursdays at 8. So that's where you are right now for what is probably my signature lecture, the one about H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. Welcome along, especially everybody new. These are all free with suggested donations. Your best bargain is the Patreon, especially at the tier where you get all the H.H. Holmes stuff. I've got archives and hard drives of files from this guy. Legal archives, paperwork, stuff off of microfilm newspapers that I could only get at the Library of Congress, etc., etc. But I'll give you the very basic recap of the story of H.H. Holmes. March 31st, 1893, the Chicago Tribune published this article, Hid in Secret Rooms Where Dealers Find Their Missing Furniture. Apparently, this guy named H.H. Holmes was operating a building that was set to be a hotel for the upcoming World's Fair, but instead of actually using the furniture he bought to furnish the hotel, he was just hiding it and selling it for cash, having bought it on credit and not paid his bills. So People would come to repossess stuff when he didn't pay, and he would say, furniture? I don't know anything about furniture. Look around. They'd look and not find anything until somebody who worked in the building showed them that there were doors that had been wallpapered over, a hidden compartment in between the first and the second floor. So this was H.H. Holmes at the time of his arrest in Boston in 1894. The building was the one we have now come to refer to as the Murder Castle. That's really a fairly modern term. At the time of the investigation, it was just called the Holmes Castle. Holmes himself just called it the Englewood property or the Wallace Street Flats. But November of 1894, he was arrested for having murdered his best friend. At the time, they didn't know he had murdered his best friend. They thought he had faked his best friend's death to swindle money out of an insurance company. And this was a big deal. He was in papers all over the place for about a week, and a lot of people remembered, hey, wasn't there something in the paper about a year and a half ago saying that he had a building down on the south side in Chicago that was full of hidden rooms and secret passages? Think we ought to investigate that? And then they decided, nah. Until about 7 or 8 months later, when they discovered a couple of his best friend's children's bodies buried in a cellar in Toronto. At that point, they decided, okay, now we'd better investigate this place. And the story began to get wilder and wilder, culminating in the New York Herald publishing this diagram of the second floor. The place was said to be rigged up with everything you could possibly need to kill a person. The 5-door room, the black closet, the room of the 3 corpses, the sealed room, the trap door to the secret chamber, the blind room, the dark room, the hanging secret chamber, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft, the maze. Some of this was based on things that had actually been reported in Chicago, many of which had already been debunked by the time this was published, and some of it the New York Herald just made up themselves. They did not have a reporter on the ground in Chicago doing actual investigations themselves, but finding out what really happened and how the legend grew was a very long process. Spent a lot of time in the microfilm room over at the library, but you can't just do the Chicago papers either. You got to stick with the Chicago papers for like the investigation into the castle building, but then you've got all this stuff that went on in Philadelphia where he was on trial. There's stuff that happened in St. Louis. There's stuff that happened in Boston. For those, you got to get the local papers from there. There was also a whole lot of stuff at the legal archives. H.H. Holmes got sued a lot, roughly once a month during the time that he lived in Chicago. So at the legal archives, there's these reels of all of the cases. You can see here H.H. Holmes versus Frederick Schultz. That was a mattress company. E. Smith, that was an investor. French and Potter Co., that was a crockery company. Now, he would buy things from credit off of people or get money from investors and then fail to repay them at all. So what you do is you write down these numbers of the legal archives. These days, they only let you do a couple at a time. Back then, they let me do a whole stack at once. And then he would come back a few weeks later after they had pulled stuff from off-site storage. And sometimes it would just be an envelope of nothing. Other times it would be a box like this, full of all of these papers full of crumbling old Victorian legalese. And some of them are things like this. This was not the easiest thing that I ever tried to read. But also you would find things like this. This is the architect's diagram of the first floor front of the Murder Castle building. And through this, not only can we piece together a lot of what actually happened with Holmes in Chicago, but by reading other stuff written about him over the years, we could also find things like how the legend grew. A lot of it came from this book, Gangs of Chicago, which was originally published as Gem of the Prairie by a guy named Herbert Asbury, who was very open about the fact that he liked to make stuff up. He told people what he thought they would think was cool. A great deal of what we think we know about Holmes, just about everything that's been written about him in the late 20th century on, came more from Gem of the Prairie than anything else. A lot of the stories about torture equipment found in the building came from here. A lot of the stuff about bones found in the building is more in common with what was in this book than what was in the papers at the time, and so on and so on. We'll cover quite a bit of this over the course of it, so what we're going to do from here is we will just go through a nice overview of the whole thing. Sorry, I know I'm kind of like taking my clothes off here. I'm way overdressed. It is really hot in my apartment tonight. I don't know why, but I'll at least have on a jacket so I look somewhat respectable. Pick up Pepsi in these hype receptacles. All right, I got 1990 all over me today. All right, so this is the home in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, where H.H. Holmes lived as a young boy. Still standing. He was born under the name of Herman Webster Mudgett. I'd probably change my name too if my name was Herman Mudgett. Now, some of what we know of his boyhood comes from his autobiography, Holmes' Own Story. Trouble is, the autobiography is ridiculously unreliable. Partly because Holmes wrote it himself, and this guy lied constantly. He lied when he didn't have to. He lied to the census man. He lied when it only made things worse for him. Also, there's pretty strong evidence that there are wide swaths of the autobiography that he probably didn't write himself. In particular, any part that is actually interesting is quite likely to have been written in by somebody else. It's just kind of the case when somebody is big in the news. Often, like if they have a viral video or something, publishers will decide, hey, we could get a book out of this. But they're not necessarily capable of writing one, so the publisher has to bring in a ghostwriter or punch it up a little bit, and they may or may not actually admit to this. So, we do know that when he was 17, he married a young woman named Clara Lovering, who lived around his vicinity. They had a son named Robert, and Robert and Clara went with him when he went to Ann Arbor to study medicine at the University of Michigan. By all accounts, he was a lousy student. A couple of professors later said that they just graduated him out of pity. The other people in the college called him Smegma. That was his college nickname. But while he was at college, though, he did get involved in a couple of swindles. He swindled a couple of widows. Clara was seen walking around the boarding house with black eyes, and then eventually, before Holmes graduated, she took Robert back to New Hampshire. Didn't see him again for probably 5 to 6 years. We know that he went back a bit in 1888 and a bit in 1894. But how often he saw his family after getting out of college is kind of a question mark. So he bummed around the Midwest for a couple of years, met a woman named Myrta Zutik Belknap, and married her, even though he was still technically married to Clara back in New Hampshire. He did file for divorce against her and said that while they were in New Hampshire, she had been cheating on him. He even named names in the divorce suit, but nothing ever came of it. She didn't respond, he didn't really press the issue, and eventually the whole thing just got kind of swept under the rug. So by now, eventually, baby Lucy was born to Holmes and Myrta. There's only one photograph of Myrta, and it's this one over on the left. It's from way later in her life. She eventually became a teacher who was really, really into correct spelling. That was her hot button issue. Eventually, in 1893, he built her a house in Wilmette that still stood up until the 1990s. What is that? Now, she was officially the owner of this place. Now, Holmes and Myrta, we don't know exactly when they got married. There's no date on file. There's one date that a detective wrote down, but we don't know where he got it. I suspect they never actually had a legal ceremony and probably were not, in any sense of the word, legally married. But they came to Chicago first in 1886, and that is the first time we know of that Holmes was using the name HH Holmes. He had to go down to Springfield to get a pharmacy license. According to him, he came to Chicago, found there was no real work for doctors, but plenty for pharmacists, but only if you had your license. So he went down to Springfield, got his license, came back up, and got a job in Dr. Holton's pharmacy. Now, this is the way they always tell the story of Dr. Holton in Holmes books these days. They always say that Dr. Holton was an old man who was slowly dying of cancer while his poor hapless wife tried to run the pharmacy herself. So she was only too happy to hire this energetic young go-getter named Holmes, but then shortly thereafter, she and her husband both disappeared and were never seen again. Holmes told everybody that they had gone to California, and he was now the owner of the pharmacy. Now, earliest we can really trace this version of the story to is that Herbert Asbury book from 1940. Now, she was mentioned in the press. Mrs. Dr. Holton came up now and then, and there was some talk about, a little bit of talk about how they had trouble getting the money from Holmes, but nothing about them disappearing. So this was one of my first really deep dives into Holmes lore, trying to figure out, okay, if these two were missing, somebody must have gone looking for them. Somebody must have said something. Who were Dr. and Mrs. Holton? Most of what was really known was that it was Dr. E.S. Holton. This is from a city directory, 63rd and Wallace. But that doesn't really help us much. There were a lot of E.S. Holtons floating around in the city at the time. I finally found this national medical directory that listed every doctor and pharmacist in practice, and that finally gave the first name. Turns out it was Elizabeth Sarah Holton. The doctor was a woman. What? Turns out Dr. Holton was not an old man at all. She was a young woman. Her husband had some kind of job on the railway, and they both lived into the 20th century. I got a selfie with their graves here. They're not far from Harry's sex at Oakwood Cemetery. In fact, Harry is just at the back of this section where we do a cleanup during Mystericon in October. And right across from there are the Holtons. So, contrary to what it says in Gangs of Chicago, Holmes is at least off the hook for these ones. But once he became in charge of that operation, he got right to work swindling. This thing that I showed you earlier from the legal archives is from Holmes, like buying a bunch of barbershop equipment to use in the pharmacy and then not paying for it. He got away with it because the barber who had sold him the stuff busted back in and tried to repossess it all by himself, which is not the proper legal channels to do this. But while he was there, early 1887, just a few months after taking over the pharmacy, he bought the land across the street to start construction in 1887 on the building we would come to know as the Castle. Now, incidentally, this was a long time before the World's Fair was even announced, so it definitely wasn't built in conjunction with it or specifically to prey on anybody from it. But people who built it were actually paid. It was their bosses who weren't paid. It was kind of like the Donald Trump plan. The workers get paid, but their bosses don't. That was the case here. We know from the legal archives that there was exactly who the contractors were and how much they all got paid. And we know this because Holmes never paid their bosses off. It was the Etna Iron and Steel Company who built this. When they delivered all the materials, one of the I-beams was a couple inches too short. Holmes tried to claim that invalidated the contract and he didn't have to pay no matter what they did to fix it. Didn't work, but he managed to drag it on for quite a long time. But eventually this place got him sued by all kinds of people, all kinds of creditors, all kinds of contractors, all kinds of investors, people who had worked on it, people who had put seed money into it. And eventually in 1893, right before the World's Fair, or during the fair, it was sold into receivership. Holmes just kind of ignored that this had happened, but there was a summons that went out. Normally a summons will be like, we command you to summon so-and-so. This one is, we command you to summon Lucy Belknap, John Belknap, Isaac Lowenberg, investor, Frank Douglas, investor, Julia Conner, bookkeeper, now dead, Charles and Thomas Bryan, investors, now dead. No, they weren't dead. But no, this is like page 1 of 3 of all the people who had to be summoned, who had an interest in the place. And apparently this had happened before, because up at the top where it says, we command you to summon, some poor weary soul is written in the word again. It's one of my favorite archives finds right there. Getting to see a legal clerk having a bad day. So building that occupied him through most of 1887. I will cover 1888 just briefly because people always ask me if I've heard the stories that he might be Jack the Ripper. Yes, I was on half the episodes at the American Ripper show, but October of 1888, Holmes registered to vote. All through October and September of 1888, he was dealing with the Etna Iron and Steel lawsuit. And it was also mentioned by his father that in late October of that month and early November, he visited back in New Hampshire again, which would explain why he registered to vote but didn't actually vote in the end because he wasn't around to do so. So that's about all I got on that. Holmes was stabbing random people. Wasn't really Holmes style to begin with, but we also have pretty good evidence that he was in Chicago during the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. I would say he's off the hook for that one as well. 1889, a guy moved into the building by the name of Ned Conner. He and his wife Julia had moved in from Iowa. It was probably Julia's idea. He eventually moved back to Iowa himself. But they moved in, Ned, Julia, and their daughter Pearl, who was 4 years old at the time. So Ned was given a job working in the jewelry shop, and then Holmes convinced Julia to start working as the bookkeeper in the place, and fairly openly having an affair with her. Ned knew all about it. I think everybody except Myrtle, Holmes' wife, knew pretty much all about it at the time. And Ned eventually quit, went to work someplace else, but Holmes kept on coming to see him to get him involved in some other scheme that he had come up with. Eventually, Ned got really annoyed. There's one letter on file saying, if I ever get $1 from you, I will take it as the same as just finding $1. So Christmas of 1891, Julia and Pearl were supposed to go to Davenport, Iowa for Julia's sister's wedding. but she never showed up. Shortly thereafter, Holmes started writing letters to her father saying, hey, by the way, can you get in touch with Julia? She's left my employ, but I need her to sign some paperwork. Or one day he went to see Ned, said, Ned, I don't know where Julia and Pearl are. Can you tell me where they are? I know you're divorced, but you have to know where your daughter is, right? And the first time Holmes asked that, Ned said, yes, I do know where they are. And Holmes stepped back a little bit. And eventually Ned admitted, no, I don't really know where they are. I just said that to get under your skin. At that point, Holmes relaxed quite a bit, because he knew exactly where Julia and Pearl were. They were dead. Now, Holmes wrote a number of confessions towards the end of his life. They contradict each other constantly. None of them are totally reliable. But one thing he was fairly consistent on was saying that Julia died during an abortion. May not have even been intentional on his part. By all accounts, he was a very bad doctor. This was a dangerous operation. He never really said what happened to Pearl. Based on other findings, my guess is he probably would have killed her with cyanide. Exactly whatever became of their bodies is not really known, but there were some bones that were possibly theirs eventually found in his building. Julia's place within the castle building was soon taken by a young woman named Emelia Segrand, who moved in May of 1892, was having an affair with somebody. And we have to just kind of assume it was Holmes. Some people have said it might have been Patrick Quinlan, the janitor, or Ben Peitzel, Holmes' friend. Not really based on much. Emeline acted like a woman with a secret. She was telling all of her friends that she was engaged, but she could never keep the guy's name straight. Sometimes it was Mr. Belknap. Sometimes it was Mr. This, something else. What I could piece together, the sense that I got is that she knew Holmes was married to a woman named Murda who lived up in the north suburbs, but she thought that Murda was dying. And in a couple of years, Murda would be gone, and she would marry Holmes, and they'd live in a nice big house on Honore Street together. But for now, she had to keep it kind of quiet. That was the story anyway. It was while Emmeline was working for him in 1892 that he decided he was going to add a third floor onto the building. At the time, it had just been retail on the first floor, apartments on the second. He added a third that he said was going to be a hotel space for the upcoming World's Fair. Because with the World's Fair coming to town, everybody in Chicago thought that they were going to get rich. Holmes took advantage of this. I don't think he ever really intended to run this place as a hotel. He'd figured out pretty early that you could make a lot more money pretending to start a hotel than actually running one. All through 1892, he was buying up fire insurance policies. He was meeting with investors. A doctor who lived on the second floor of the building put a few $1,000 in. A guy from the cigar shop on the first floor put some money in. He typed up these letters. This one is to Bliss, Bullard, and Gormley, a hardware company, saying, Gentlemen, please deliver to HH Holmes hardware for 701 and 703 63rd Street, in which I will guarantee the payment as owner of building. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell. There was no H.S. Campbell. That was just H.H. Holmes. But these things worked like a credit card for him. He wrote one of these to the hardware company here, but also to the flooring company, to the mattress company, to the furniture company, to pretty much anybody, and they gave him hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars worth of goods on credit, which he had no intention of paying. And incidentally, down here we've got bill should be addressed to H.H. Holmes. That's Holmes' handwriting right there. I've been through enough of these that I can recognize it pretty well. Below that is a place for a gum company, like a fruit and gum company at 110 Market Street, Philadelphia. I just recently heard from a guy who says that Holmes had some kind of scheme going with those guys, but I'm not really sure what the details are or what he really knows about it. In any case, it's not Holmes' handwriting. Now, Emmeline disappeared in May of 1892. A lot of the neighbors said, hey, isn't it weird? She was here yesterday and now she's gone. And Holmes said, oh, what do you know? She went off and got married to some guy named Robert Phelps. They've gone off to Europe now. And now here I am without a secretary. But of course, he was not without a secretary for long, because her place was taken by a woman named Minnie Williams. This is one of the only victims we actually have a photograph of. One of the interesting things about Holmes is that the story all takes place during this one little sliver of history when newspapers have gotten really good at putting drawings in. They're a lot more illustrated than they had been a decade before, but a little bit before they started having pictures. So if this had all happened a decade later, we would have pictures of every single victim, every room in that building, every tiny piece of evidence. As it is, it's mostly drawings. But there was a woman by the name of Minnie Williams. She had grown up primarily in Texas. This is her when she was young. This is probably would have been a photograph that had been published 10 years later. As it is, it's just a drawing of a photo. She and her siblings were orphaned at a young age and all went to grow up with separate guardians. Minnie went off to lived with a series of different guardians, then went to Boston to go to elocution school. Elocution being like a kind of acting that nobody does anymore. It's reading out loud on stage. But then she ran out of money and told her guardian, I guess it's time that I got a real job. So she went to Chicago, and I always say there's a lesson here about giving up on your dreams, because as soon as she did, she fell into the hands of HH Holmes, started working for him. They rented an apartment together on the north side, the exact location of which is a little hard to find. You can go by the renumbering guide, but it doesn't really match the maps that went around at the time. In any case, it's gone now. But her sister Nanny, who she really barely knew, they had grown up separately, and by some accounts, she didn't even remember she had a sister till they were reunited as teenagers. But her sister Nanny moved in along with them, and both of them disappeared in July of 1893. I wish we had better pictures of Minnie than we do of this one. But there's something about Minnie. This was the headline, she dealt in mystery. Nobody ever quite knew what to make of Minnie. Her friends back at her old schools were like, she was with a man? She was known as a real man-hater. The impression I get is she definitely seems to have known more of what was going on than a lot of the other people who worked for Holmes. She knew a lot of the business dealings, at least, were not entirely on the level. My guess is she thought she was using him to make money to relaunch her acting career. But who knows? Now, later on, when Holmes was asked about them, he had this whole long story saying, oh, well, I admit that Nanny is dead, but Minnie killed her. I helped get rid of the body, but that's all. And if anybody else is being found dead now, Minnie probably did that too and made it look like I did it to keep suspicion off of her. It was convincing absolutely nobody. There's one other picture that I think might be of her. This is from a program she appeared in, of a show she appeared in Boston. She was doing what they called tableaus. Like, the only way you really see it these days is in The Music Man. The old lady's going, one Grecian urn. She is portraying envy, I believe, here. I'm not 100% sure that's her. They don't attribute it to anybody, but it does look pretty close to her and has at least some level of provenance. But she disappeared in July of 1893 along with Nanny. And August, the next month, the building caught fire. The third floor caught fire anyway. The third floor had been the space that was supposed to be the hotel. But it never was furnished. It was never open for business. He had tried to rent it out to a couple other guys, but they realized they were in with a den of thieves and got out of the place. But Holmes had taken out at least 4 fire insurance policies on it. So strangely enough, right in the middle of the fair, it caught fire. And this is part of how we know it wasn't functioning as a hotel. The fire there did not make the news. When a World's Fair hotel caught fire, it made the news. And later accounts from like lawsuits and things to it show that there were only like 5 or 6 people in the whole building, all long-term residents and employees. But the insurance companies, to their credit, were not fooled for 1 second. They started investigating Holmes. He spent the fall of 1893 bopping around from one hotel to the next trying to stay away from them. Eventually things got too hot for him and he decided to leave. But as he left, he married again, this time to a woman named Georgiana Yoke, who knew him as Henry Mansfield Howard. She knew that he also went by Holmes, and I think she mentioned that she knew that that wasn't his original name either. But he had this whole long story. He said, well, you see, my rich uncle was named Henry Mansfield Howard, and he always wanted someone to be his namesake. He agreed to make me his heir if I took on his name. So that's why I go by a couple of different names. Now, we don't have a photograph of her either. Not one that we can confirm anyway, just a number of drawings that showed up in the newspapers. But she's kind of a fascinating person. We know a little bit more about her than we do about the other wives. Some of her writings and letters have survived. This one, I don't know if that's supposed to be her or what. Sometimes newspapers would publish a Mrs. H.H. Holmes and not tell you who they meant. But she has even been the subject of a novel called A Competent Witness by Judith Nichols. I'll leave that up for a second. Now, This is a novel. It's as well researched as Judith could make it. And then when I found a couple of letters that Georgiana had written that got published in Philadelphia papers, it's amazing. She captured the voice exactly. She figured out almost everything that Georgiana said in the letter. It was almost uncanny. But when Holmes decided to go leave Chicago for a while, he took with him a guy named Benjamin Peitzel, who had been involved in several nefarious business deals with him over the years. And in fact, as of 1893, Peitzel was a much more famous criminal than Holmes was. Holmes had been in the Tribune for stealing furniture, but Peitzel was all over the papers for a while for a check-passing scheme that he had been running in Indiana. Holmes somehow got him out of jail for it, and apparently said, "Okay, Ben, you owe me now. You know, here's what we're going to do now. We are going to go to Philadelphia. Well, first we're going to go to Fidelity Mutual and buy you a life insurance policy. And then in a year when it matures, we will go to Philadelphia and fake your death. We'll find the dead body that looks like you. Then we'll say that it was you, take that $10,000 payout, live like kings." So the two of them first went down to Texas, because they had to kill some time until the policy would mature, I imagine. So they went down to Texas to build another building on land that Holmes had mysteriously been able to buy from Minnie Williams for $1. There's an awful lot of legal archive stuff about this place. Probably more down in Texas that I haven't been able to find yet. But he built a building that was sort of like a double-sized version of the one that he had built in Chicago. There is a diagram of the inside of at least part of it. One of the newspaper reporters who investigated the place said if it was an old castle, they would call it the Castle of Many Doors. Not the most creative thing I ever heard in my life, but we'll go with it. This was a building that was never really occupied in Holmes' time. He built it using pretty much the same methods he had done in Chicago, borrowing stuff, never paying his bills. But it was still not quite ready to be opened when he got into trouble in Texas. The authorities in Texas were a lot rougher on him than the people back in Chicago had been. They were a little bit more vigilant, especially because he got involved in horse swindles. They don't take kindly to horse thieves down in Texas. So by the summer of 1894, he had gone to St. Louis, where he started a drugstore and got right back to swindling people like Hennessy Cognac, was caught right away, ended up in jail, where he met a guy named Marion Hedgepeth. Now, I want to go back a little bit to Holmes going to Texas and calling himself Mr. Howard. I kind of feel like he had decided to reinvent himself as a Wild West outlaw. He had this whole story. He was using a different name in Texas and told Georgiana, I have to use a different name because everybody down there knows the name of H.M. Howard. There are murderous squatters on my uncle's land, and if they found out that Mr. Howard came to town, they'd shoot us. Also, Mr. Howard was the alias Jesse James used to use. So then he got involved in horse swindles, and when he got arrested in St. Louis, he ended up sharing the cell with a famous train robber. Here he was, using the same name Jesse James used, and here's Hedgepeth, who robbed the Glendale train, the same train that Jesse James had robbed. Holmes was completely starstruck and came up to Marion and said, "So, Mr. Hedgepeth, I've got this big plan. My friend and I are going to fake his death in Philadelphia in a couple of months once I get out of here, and then we'll get all this money from the insurance company. Do you want us to use some of it to get you out of jail, and then you can come to Europe with us?" Hedgepeth was distinctly unimpressed. But when Holmes got out of jail there, he went to Philadelphia, where they rented this house on Callowhill Street. Now, it may have been that Holmes was planning to fake Ben Peitzel's death. It's impossible to know. He went on telling way more people than he should have for a long time. But somewhere along the line, he decided to just kill him. He killed him with chloroform poisoning, and Peitzel was buried in a shallow grave. Holmes immediately contacted the insurance company and said, "Oh, that guy named B.F. Perry was really Benjamin Peitzel. Here's his insurance policy. I will come help identify the body and take the money back to the widow." He kept most of the money for himself, of course. But after this, he realized by now detectives were on his tail. He was being followed all over the place, and by this time he didn't even know exactly what they were following him for. Could have been any number of things. So he started traveling around the country with 3 of Peitzel's children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, until November of 1894 when they caught up with him in Boston. When they arrested him in Boston, it was officially for faking Benjamin Peitzel's death, but the Boston authorities didn't want to work on a coroner's warrant, so they arrested him for an outstanding horse thief lawsuit over in Texas. And Holmes immediately said, listen, I don't want to go to Texas to stand trial as a horse thief. I bet this is really about me being wanted for insurance fraud in Philadelphia, right? Let's go to Philly. And this made him like what they would call a 9 days wonder. For a week and a half, he was in the paper all over the place. People started talking about these other people they had seen him with in Chicago who had now disappeared. And they remembered, didn't he have a building full of hidden passages and secret rooms? And then they just kind of forgot. Everybody, he went out of the news throughout the winter. In spring of 1895, he was put on trial just for the faking his friend's death. Oh, really, by then he had changed his story. He said, okay, I admit that really was Benjamin Peitzel's body. It was a suicide. I just tried to make it look as though it was an accident so the family would get the money. So sue me. That would have been like a 2-year prison sentence. But then the district attorney brought him in and said, okay, earlier on you said that these children who were with you, traveling with you, and are now missing, were off with their father. Now you admit that their father is dead. So where are the kids? And now Holmes said, oh, they're off with an ex-girlfriend of mine named Minnie Williams. She has taken them to London. But here's what we can do. I will write you out this letter with a secret code. If you place a secret coded message in the New York Herald, maybe she'll see that in London. So he wrote this thing out with a secret code. Like capital R meant A, E meant B, P meant C, etc. Lowercase meant something else. A few letters you should just use as regular or leave out altogether. The New York Herald was famous for ads like this. Like, they would have amethyst, letter at old place, H. Or blue RN, proud, diffident, reason, try, right, your turn, residence. Who knows? Bright French brunette desires acquaintance of American gentleman of means, object matrimony. There was a lot of things like, the woman who saw me on the train last week, I would love to get to know you a little bit more. Or, Charlie's aunt, do not neglect me. Call me soon, will you? A lot of stuff like this. They were great prey for swindlers. But they're very entertaining to read by themselves. But in this same issue was this one, Minnie Williams, the Deal Cavell, Geraldine Wanda. This translates to something like, contact Mr. Massey immediately and also write to me. But of course she didn't see it. She was probably quite dead by then. And while it was still running in the paper, or while they were waiting to hear from her, they put a detective named Frank Geyer on the case to travel around the country where Holmes had been fleeing from detectives and see if they could figure out what happened with the kids. Eventually they found Alice and Nellie buried in a shallow grave in a rental property that Holmes had rented in Toronto. And as soon as this story broke, everybody knew this was not a swindling case, this was a murder case. Then they remembered once again this building back in Chicago full of hidden rooms and secret passages, and this became a media sensation. Now, there's no picture of the inside from Holmes' lifetime. This was probably based on a picture. The picture is not surfaced, but this was a drawing that appeared in the Chicago Chronicle. But crowds started appearing outside of this place. The police and the reporters started walking around all over the place, trying to dig things up, trying to find anything that might be suspicious. And really what happened is they went around saying things like, we found a rope. Maybe he was hanging people, or we found gas lines. Maybe these were for gassing people. Sure, they're also used for heating and things like that, but, they could also be used for killing people. And that's really kind of what happened. Their imaginations just went running away with them. Partly this was the fault of having a new police chief, John J. Badenoch. 3 months before, this guy had been a flour and feed dealer. He had no police experience or legal training or any background whatsoever that would make him a police chief. But the new mayor liked the cut of his jib, so he made him the chief. On the case also was a fresh young kid named Detective Sergeant John W. Norton, who didn't come off too well in this case, but eventually would be with the force for like 40 years. And Inspector Fitzpatrick, a veteran of the Haymarket affair. So they went digging around. They made a big deal that we found this tank full of gas. Turned out to be pretty regular heating gas. There's a story that goes around that it launched a huge explosion. Somebody tasted it and acted as though he were mad for days. Rather exaggerated, really. They also made a big deal out of finding what appeared to be bones in the stove. Like maybe he was cremating people in here. Till somebody pointed out there is really no way that you could cremate somebody in a wood-burning stove. One thing that comes up now and then is this strange footprint. He did have a couple of soundproof walk-in vaults inside of the place. And it never really occurred to anybody at first. I wonder, why would you want your vault to be soundproof? But there was, some people said that you could see a footprint on the door, like a woman's footprint, like someone had tried to kick her way out. Other people said that they could see lots of footprints on the door. Other people said that they couldn't see a footprint at all. Unfortunately, there's no photo and the door itself does not survive, so there's really just no way that we can know whether that was just an optical illusion or what. But newspapers had a blast with this. Chicago Mail had headlines like, "Fiendish! Dastard!" This one, "Red stains on a rope." And this is an interesting one, as they kind of debunk themselves as they go within the headline here. "Red stains on a rope. Supposed bloody nooses found in HH Holmes' house in a dust-covered chest. The theory is that victims were hanged by the neck. Might be cochineal. Die at that." So after a couple of weeks of digging, they'd find bones, and then it would turn out that they were turkey bones. They'd find any number of things that turned out to be something else. They weren't really consulting with experts at all. The newspapers had to do that. Until eventually the Chicago Daily News was publishing things like, "Laughing at the police. Plenty of talk, but no legal evidence in the Holmes case thus far. General belief that the police would do better to talk less. Smile more." So right as this article was coming out and people were starting to think, this whole story has just been blown out of proportion. He probably did kill those few people, but we're never going to find enough in Chicago to bring him to trial. All of a sudden, this article came out, "Bones in a Trunk." The police announced that a guy had come in who was a skeleton articulator, a guy who took dead bodies and turned them into skeletons to sell to medical schools, and said, "Ha! Here it is. This guy used to buy dead bodies from H.H. Holmes. That's why we can't find them, because they were all turned into skeletons that are probably in medical schools to this day." They thought the guy's name was Charles Chappell at first. That's still what they call him in a great many Holmes books. His name turned out to be Myron G. Chappell. And within about an hour of the story getting cleared up, the newspaper started to look into it and found that he was not anybody that you should actually be believing in. Myron Chappell had been a skeleton articulator once years ago, but had been in no fit shape to do so since long before H.H. Holmes started killing anybody. What they've turned out was he had one body that he had never finished articulating. He had painted the skull red and hung it up on a tree in his front yard. And one of the neighbors thought, "Wow, look at that. Maybe that's a Holmes victim," and called the police. So the police talked to this guy and realized he would say pretty much whatever they wanted to if they poured him enough whiskey down his throat. He continued to be talked about in connection with the case for a long time, but his story didn't hold water. In fact, the Chicago Mail, the same one that had been publishing things like "Fiendish" and "Dastard," called his story "The Vaporings of a Weak Mind." Love that line. It was things that really wound down in Chicago when the New York World published this article, rehashing some of the Chicago stuff and adding a whole bunch of their own, saying "The Castle of a Modern Bluebeard." This really is document one. For looking at the legend of H.H. Holmes, this is the major thing. For one thing, they didn't realize that the building had never actually been a hotel. So they described it as this bustling hotel with hundreds of rooms and had this very lurid paragraph. "At the end of the World's Fair, the number of people who never returned was a long one, and in the greater number foul play was suspected. How many of these unsuspecting people may have found their way to Holmes' room?" It's not an exact quote, but it's like that. But that paragraph ended up being reprinted in just about every Holmes book that was ever written thereafter. That single-handedly, just them spitballing, based on an incorrect assumption, set the whole legend in place for H.H. Holmes, that he was operating a hotel to prey on people who came to the World's Fair. And even now, if you look up Holmes, you're probably going to see this diagram. And there are some points in it when you read the Chicago articles, you can see how they misinterpreted something, how they made a mistake, which parts they were just making up. But it's still just it's such a heck of a story that, of course, it endured. And a couple of weeks after they printed it, the Chicago Tribune reran this entire article saying to you, "Will you look at how we look to New York right now? Here's how the case appears in New York." And the day that ran in Chicago, the castle burned. It didn't burn to the ground, it just caught fire. Somebody apparently read it and thought, well, not in my backyard. It didn't burn the whole place down. They had to rebuild the top couple of floors. But these other pictures, this is a picture of it from about the turn of the 20th century when it had a stylish turret up top. And you often see these ones online. These are actually from 1938. You can tell they're not from the 1890s. There's a pickup truck parked over to the right of it. They eventually tore it down in the late 1930s to make room for the new Englewood post office that still stands. They're not really in the same space. Like here's a diagram showing where the post office is, and next to it over on the left, that's where the castle would have been. There's just a tiny bit of overlap. So it would have been about like this. Now there's one portion of the basement that does line up. I'll promise at the end of the tour I'll play the audio recording from down there, as I have gotten to go down there with the History Channel a couple of times. It's pretty cool, but there's nothing original down there. There's a couple of bricks that you can see back behind me there that look older than a lot of the other ones, but they go way outside of the footprint of where the castle would have been. So everything kind of wrapped up in Chicago over the course of the summer of 1895. That fall, Holmes published his confession, then went on trial in Philadelphia. He was tried just for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel, and eventually convicted and sentenced to hang by the neck until he was dead. Thereafter, a story started going around that Holmes had a curse on people. Now, this was published in the New York World. It was kind of them getting revenge. All the newspapers were going after Holmes, trying to get him to write a confession. When Holmes went with another paper instead, the World kind of got their revenge, first by saying, no, we know he's writing a confession. He's going to confess to 20 murders. And then published this thing saying that lots of people who were involved in the trial are now already dead. And a couple of them were. But there were other things like one guy broke his leg, one guy got sick. Much of this doesn't really hold up to any fact-checking whatsoever. But it did keep the story alive. Because thereafter, after Holmes' death, every so often, somebody who'd worked on the case or been peripherally involved in the case would die by suicide or something, and they would have to bring up the story of Holmes again. That's part of why the story survived as long as it did. But he was hired jointly by the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Journal to write a confession. And since the New York World had just announced that he was going to be confessing to 20 murders, he had to confess to more than that to make it a marketable story. So he threw in an extra 7 and said he had killed 27 people. The confession is completely unreliable. There's even the ones where he's telling the truth about killing them. To the extent that we can check it, he seems to be completely changing the story of how he did it. Close as he comes is the way he describes killing Howard Peitzel, the third child of Benjamin, might be about right. But even within a day of it, the whole thing had been debunked. He was laughing the whole thing off, writing another version and trying to sell that as well. But a month after it was published, he was hanged in Philadelphia. On the scaffold, he said, "Oh no, I've only actually killed 2 people." He said it was just Emmeline and Julia, both of whom died at his hands as the result of illegal operations. A few modern sources make a big deal out of the fact that it took him about 15 minutes before they could declare him dead. But that's really common. If you read accounts of 19th century hangings, it almost always took about 15 minutes. I've read way more than I'd honestly care to. By his own request, he was buried in a giant block of cement. This was kind of a trend at the time. A lot of guys were worried about having their body held for ransom. Holmes had a lot of people try to buy his dead body so they could display it in a sideshow. So his attorney Samuel Rotan arranged for him to be buried in this block of cement to save him from grave robbers, but not thinking of the awesome power of the History Channel. So 2 years after his death, or about a year and a half after, a story went around. There was a book published called Hanged by Proxy by a guy named A.L. Warner. And Mr. Warner said what really happened was that wasn't Holmes who was hanged. The night before, they hanged some other guy with a mustache. And for the hanging, they just propped him up on the scaffold. This would have looked exactly like Weekend at Bernie's, mustache and everything. And then they hanged him, and then Holmes was already on a train to New York, and now he is in San Pedro, Orimba, South America, growing coffee with Minnie Williams. This was debunked almost immediately. Mr. Warner, for his part, actually had been one of Holmes' swindling victims. Holmes had gotten him involved in this glass bending company. There's the button. And actually in his confession had claimed to murder him. but he was still alive and well and selling novelties in Newton, Iowa. But this was enough. The fact that this story had gone around, the History Channel actually used this to get a judge to give an okay to exhume the body and see if it was really H.H. Holmes just a few years back. So, move this back a little bit. So here's how he looked in all of that cement. I'm still kind of bitter. Half the reason I gave them all of this data was I wanted to be there when they did the exhumation. But then when I finally called him, oh yeah, we've been here for 3 days. But here's how he looks all cleaned up for a night on the town. And DNA tests matching with his great-great-grandson did indicate that this was in fact H.H. Holmes. Really, I could tell before just by the picture of the skull that had gone around. Because while he was in prison, a doctor named Eugene Talbot came and did some tests on him, gave him a physical exam, took a jaw cast, and you could match up the jaw. He's missing all of the right teeth are bent. It was really fairly cool to be able to do something like that. But I tend to wrap up here before we go to the closing with the one thing from the Talbot report that I know that I just can't top. Most of Talbot's report is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in the summer of 1896, was about the bumps and ridges on Holmes' skull. He had a lot of bumps and ridges on his skull. There was one of them he said he got in a railroad accident that gave him amnesia or something. And this was still a day when people thought they could tell a lot about a guy by the bumps and ridges on his skull. But buried in the midst of it was this one stray line at the bottom of the first full paragraph. Sexual organs, unusually small. All right, everybody. So that is the true history of H.H. Holmes, the White City Devil. Let me go ahead and plug the upcoming events. Sunday morning, Gold Coast Tales, a tour of the Gold Coast in Chicago with all my favorite stories and buildings from around there. Right after that, I will hightail it to Graceland Cemetery for the first in-person tour of the year. Tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com. And a week from tonight, I realized, you know how long it's been since I did a virtual version of the Ghost Tour? We did like an off-route one in October, but otherwise I haven't done a virtual ghost tour in like a year around here. So let's bring that one on back. So lots and lots of stuff coming up here. There's always stuff happening here. And should you need a sweatshirt, t-shirt, or hoodie, cafepress.com/MysteriousSchicago has everything you need, including some all kinds of crazy stuff like the Rock Out with Your Johann Hawk Out t-shirt. And with that, everybody, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out. Once again, hi to everybody who came in from TikTok and saw me for the first time tonight. Patreon.com/AdamChicago. There's the H.H. Holmes tier. We're going to start adding Johann Hawk stuff to that, too, but it'll get you access to about 2 years worth of posts, of weekly posts of stuff from my H.H. Holmes files. Lots of great stuff. Patreon is your best bet. And with that, here's Benny Goodman, everybody. Let's just hang out. After that one, I always feel like Michael Flatley or something. Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, we'll play the recording in a minute. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for everybody who is kicking in to help me. It helps me stay afloat in these cold months when nobody signs up for walking tours. Do I have Disco Salad Bar in this deck? Okay, here we go. So right next to the post office is the Disco Salad Bar. The first time I got to go into the basement of the post office, well, I'll pause the Benny and we'll just go ahead and do this now. First time I got to go into the basement of the post office, that was like my icebreaker with the employees. What do you hear about the Disco Salad Bar? And some people had been there long enough that they used to go there for lunch. The general consensus was that the salad bar was okay. Earlier, it had been a really happening disco back in the late 80s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Like there was a lingerie room, there was a champagne room, there was a jazz room after disco started to die. But so I did get to go into the basement of the post office a couple of times. There is that one little tunnel section that overlaps with where the basement of the castle building would have been. And while I was down there, I had an audio recorder running. I ended up down there by myself for quite a while. And, I realized I am at this point the envy of everybody in the ghost hunting industry. I got this recorder running. Maybe I'll just whisper some names and see what happens. So I started whispering the names of the people I think were most likely to have been killed in the building, and there aren't that many of them. Just Emmeline, Julia, and Pearl, maybe the Williams sisters, and really even Emmeline, Julia, and Pearl are kind of iffy to me. But I didn't hear anything but when I was down there. But when I play the recording back, there's this voice a little bit louder than my own that sounds like a little girl singing. I do have the recording here, so see if you can hear this. First there's me whispering, then there's this girl singing. You guys hear that? I'll let that go one more time. Now, what I can't figure out is what the voice is saying. Now, the most logical suspect for who it would be Pearl Conner. As near as I can transcribe, whether she's singing or talking, there's 5 notes or 5 syllables. It sounds to me like she's saying, "Sorry, Beefalo," which sounds like the worst Chef Boyardee product of all time. But other people tend to hear, "Where did she go?" or "Why did she go?" Sometimes people hear these things very, very clearly. So I'll let it go through it one more time, see if you guys can hear it better than I can. See, I don't make any grand claims that this is evidence of the paranormal or anything. It's just something cool. One thing I say all the time is there is no such thing as good ghost evidence. There's only cool ghost evidence. So if you weren't there with me, you have to just take my word for it that I didn't fake the whole thing. Even if you were there with me, you would have to take my word that I didn't just edit that in, which would be really easy for me to do. Except that I'm always afraid I'm going to get caught if I try something like that. But no, Lori, I didn't hear it until I played it back. But people who doubt me are being correct about this. You should doubt me. It's in my direct financial interest for that place to be haunted. And it's not like ghost evidence is hard to fake. I have had other people say, if you speed correct it, it clearly says "stab me in the throat" and you must go down there and burn sage and spit in your hat 3 times. I'm always like, dude, you're an adult. The truck on the shelf behind me? Do I have a truck? Which truck? You mean the yellow submarine? So that's a yellow submarine at Grimley. Who would fake ghost evidence? I can think of a few people. Thanks, Michelle. I love my bats, too. It's probably, you might be seeing the fireplace back there. This is not a working fireplace. On the mantle, there's a Banksy print, various giraffes. Oh, there is a mystery machine. The Scooby-Doo mystery machine is up there, too. Marcia, I did go back to the tunnel once a few years later and tried to recreate it. I sat in the same place, used the same equipment, said the same stuff. That time, nothing happened. Yes, it's true. I faked it so I could get a good price selling it. I could get a good price buying it because I knew there's a treasure buried in the basement. And I would have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for you Mysterians. Does Ronnie collect vintage Disney? Now and then a little piece or two. We got enough stuff. Thanks, Kathy. What did I bring home from my folks' house? Quite a bit of stuff I brought home from my folks' house. For instance, my diploma from Book It. which indicates that I have satisfactorily completed reading goals for all 5 months of the booklet program and is therefore entitled to all due honors, awards, and praise, acknowledging the difficulty of this scholastic achievement. Honors already at the age of 8. Finding that made me really hungry for a Pizza Hut pizza, but not the kind you get there now since they tried to compete with Domino's and degraded their quality completely. I wanted one that comes in an earthenware thing, I wanted it to taste like 80s Pizza Hut, and I wanted it to come with a Land Before Time puppet. Closest I could do is get the Detroit style at Jets. That's a pretty good substitute for old school Pizza Hut. Karen, when we first talked to the people at the post office, none of them said, well, all of them said, well, I've smelled stuff down there. But the TV was like, but you've heard stuff too, right? Right? Chris, yes, the red pebbled glasses. Still run into those occasionally. Yeah, the Jets Detroit style square pizza is a pretty good. It doesn't come in the earthenware. Carol, the trip I was supposed to make to LA tomorrow got moved to later next month. But I got a Netflix thing out there. I never saw a read aloud at Pizza Hut. I mean, our Pizza Hut had a sit-down arcade machine of Super Mario Brothers. You couldn't tear us away from that. Oh, Gene, that's cool. Is my home historic? Well, it's old. I don't know if I'd say it's historic. It's not quite 100 years old. But it will be soon. Ooh, the standing Tron cabinet. Now, a while ago, my brother and I just put our heads together and tried to remember which video game was at which restaurant in Des Moines when we were growing up. I do live next to a famous architect, but I've seen him twice in 2 years. He only comes out in the middle of the night. Bob, I'll let you know later. Now, our Pizza Hut just had these little sit-down arcade things of Super Mario Brothers, just the straight-up Nintendo version. But for a kid who didn't have Nintendo, me, that was heaven. Also a jukebox that had a lot of good Guns N' Roses on it. But yeah, this isn't exactly historic, it's just old. Well, every now and then I'll be out filming something and someone's like, why are you filming my house? You don't know? Well, similarly, I just did a TikTok of Cedar Contemporary houses in Lawrenceville, Georgia. That's this space-age school of suburban design that's weird angles, front doors on the second floor. Some of the houses are more window than house. They're just goofy houses. I love them to bits. And every comment is, that's my house. I see my house in this video. Now, Marsha, I just gave away a tub of 2600 games. Chris, the Ground Round had a stand-up Ghosts and Goblins machine. And a love tester in my town. And that was back in the day when every restaurant had a video game. Shakey's had Kangaroo. And a couple others, but mainly I remember Kangaroo with the Shakey's. Have a good night, Dana. Cruisin' USA was at Skate North in Des Moines. Ninja Turtles was at various arcades and I think a bowling alley. There's one bowling alley that had 1942. Susan, my parents are moving down to closer to the coast. Good night, Bob. I'll see you on Sunday. Now, the Frogger arcade machine I rarely encountered. I haven't even thought much about Find a Grave Friday yet for tomorrow. It's going to be tricky. There's a whole lot of,
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago.
there's a whole lot of flooding going on, so it might be a little bit tricky tomorrow.
Hear Helen Ward sing, Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Sarah, that sounds like it would get me in a lot of trouble doing stuff like that. Where is Miles? Miles was running off. Miles is over on the couch now. You can see him up against the pillow there if you look closely. Priya was on this couch. Miles. Miles was mostly pre-show entertainment today. Thank you, Marita. Jordana, that sounds familiar, but I can't quite picture it. I can't quite place it. And Miles is back there by the pillow. You can see a little bit of him here. But he was mostly in the pre-show today. Yes, Sarah, the fake history talk on effing Chicago. That'll be Layla Royale. She does this every year. It's a fantastic tour every time. So I'll probably duck out a little early on whiskey and a cookie. Plus, I'm just driving myself nuts with content this week. I got to write a book in like a week. This is fast even for me. Especially it's fiction. I haven't done fiction in years, but it's a ghostwriting thing. I can't talk too much about it. I'm living that Simpsons episode where the gang write a tween-lit novel. I didn't realize I had the window open this whole time. These headlights may be distracting. They're taillights. And if anybody out there is new here, check out on Facebook. There's a group called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club.
Presenting Madhouse.
Laura, I don't know if I'll ever be able to tell you about this one. It's a secret. It's ghostwriting. Sorry about that. Yes, and this fall we will be doing Mystericon once again, a whole weekend full of tours. We'll have rooms booked at the Palmer House. I think it's the Palmer House again, right? Daily, that would be one of them, yeah. We haven't done the dailies on Find a Grave, and I've actually never been to their graves. I know they're a bit of a commute from here. We've had plenty of other mayors. No, it's a children's fiction book. It's nothing you guys are ever likely to read. But I had like 9 days to write the whole book, so... And it pays better than I usually make on my own book, so whatever. Haunted Chicago for Kids. There is one like that, but there could probably stand to be a better one. Yeah, in Holy Sepulchre, there's a lot of people in Holy Sepulchre. It's just so far away from here.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman.
Laura, yeah, that's Yes, Virginia, I believe. I believe that Bertha Palmer invented the brownie. Or had her staff do so anyway. It was supposed to be a portable dessert to go for the World's Fair. It's one of those where all of us in Chicago are like, yeah, sure. But also, yeah, officially, yes. Thank you, Spencer, on YouTube. Now, Bertha Palmer's will is a trip. It's like money to my footman, to my longtime cook.
We have been presenting the music of
I mean, she was great, but her will is very much a high society lady thing.
This is the
I was once talking to another history guy. I was like, man, I bet she was a pain in the ass. It's entirely possible. She's by no means my least favorite high society person, though.
presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
But I was put a little more, rewind the Benny a bit. I enjoy Gene. Now, Marie, I will take a pie over brownie any day of the week. Though I do kind of want a brownie now. Now, the old Palmer House recipe had like walnuts on top of it. It just kind of, I don't know, eating chocolate is relatively recent. Now, Spencer, it's not so much that he's a genius recluse, he's just in his 90s. And doesn't get out of the house much. From what I understand of his son, he's more likely to come out at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Now and then I have a sighting. Is it too late to start making brownies? Yeah. Eric, yes it is. The chess pies are basically brownies, the chocolate chess. I remember Sky Mall used to advertise brownie pans that were all corner pieces. It's like pan shaped like this. Remember Sky Mall? I miss Sky Mall. And the most useless crap in the world in every catalog in every airplane. They should really have them in bars. It's usually when you're really drunk that you would want to buy anything that they sold in Sky Mall. It's like, whoa, a Bigfoot statue for my yard. A replica of the One Ring that is also a radio. Now, Spencer, I'm just going there for a day to film some talking head shots. Espresso and whiskey brownies. It brings out my Stanley Laurel smile. Yeah. One of the very early Onion articles, owner of complete set of Mama's Family VHS tapes, never going on eBay drunk again. Spencer, this one is going to be for a Netflix series. George, you know I don't have Mr. Beeman's phone number. But you can have him look me up if he's got the time. Jenny, you're driving me nuts here. Irish coffee brownies? Here I am, just drinking regular old whiskey like a sucker. The band Haim did a great TikTok where they just sing, I'm gonna be hungover, I'm gonna be hungover, I'm gonna drink a bunch of different drinks and I'm gonna be hungover. Kathleen, I'll tell you guys later. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about it just yet. Certain projects, I'm bad at keeping my mouth shut. Like a ghostwriting project, I gotta keep it shut because it's kind of a secret. The TV stuff will all come out in good time. I'm gonna drink a bunch of different drinks. Cody Road Honey Whiskey. No, I have not. I was drinking Jepson's Bourbon Z21. Now I'm finishing off the last tiny bit of Crown Royal I had left that had been sitting on my shelf for a long time. Tom, I doubt it. It'd be nice. I'd rather you buy the Graceland book instead, you know. And I'm just doing the rough draft. By the time they get done with it, it'll probably be unrecognizable. It goes, I don't care about hyping it. By the time it comes out, I'll be emotionally distanced from it. Thank you, Tom. You know, Jordan, I've only had a couple of hangovers in my life. I never drank that much. It only happened a couple, and back when I was on the Weird Chicago Tour company. Back when they were doing much more drinking tours. In the sex tours and stuff. I ran a couple of those. While also writing young adult novels. It felt very weird. But I am an adult. Carol, yeah, that was in Iowa, the Booker Award. Any advice about turning 40? Well, happy birthday, Spencer. 40 is the new 30. And 30 is the new 15. 20 is the new 15. Well, no, I got no advice. Just roll with it. It's just a number. Keep listening to new music. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that the 80s were so much better than nowadays. So, in some ways they were better, other ways they're not. Really, I wouldn't go back, but...
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
So you hear about Myers, the music that was hot when we were in high school, like nu metal, was, you know, we got screwed. You know, the music that's out when you're in high school is supposed to be the music of your life. But really, after Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, there were some great albums that came out when I was in high school, but the stuff that was on the radio was just crap. I mean, pop music is so much better now than it was when I was in high school. Rock music is so much better now than it was when I was in high school. I'll once again plug Samia's recent cover of Born on a Train by the Magnetic Fields. It's the best thing I've heard in forever. It is kind of depressing hearing Third Eye Blind on the Oldies channel. You know what else is depressing is just having to hear Third Eye Blind. All those bands with numbers in their names that were hot at the time. Some of them were on it. Marvelous 3 did some good stuff. And then you had your 7 Mary 3. Well, Ben Folds 5 is a whole different thing. All of a sudden, like late 90s, early 00s, every band had a number in their name. Yep, 311. Matchbox 20. As opposed to Matchbox 1 through 19. Millennial Depression, yeah. That's part of why ska was suddenly so much fun in 1997. We had like 6 years of like pure depression rock. And all of a sudden there was this like bright, happy skanking music. Oh, the new Camp Cope album came out last week too. It's terrific. But hey, look what oh, another thing that I got from my parents, I was really from Grandma Belle, the ultimate thrift store find, whipped cream and other delights. It's really a very good record. There's a reason it sold so many copies that there's one in every single thrift store in the United States of America.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
There's Kermit. I took this Kermit home from Atlanta. See, I don't remember the peanut shells at Ground Round. I remember popcorn on the table. Oh yeah, the neo swing came after ska because the problem with ska is if you hear one ska album, you've pretty much heard them all. So the next year, every ska band became a swing band. Jeff, this is not a vintage shirt. This is just from, I got it a couple of years ago. And I think it was a reprint.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago.
Kristen, on that subject, there's, who was I just listening to? Kay Flay has a terrific piano version of Self-Esteem by The Offspring. Which is great, because that's a really dark, sad song, but they kind of play it like it's a joke. It's not a joke. Abusive girlfriends are not a joke. But yeah, I loved 90s swing. I saw Brian Setzer opening for Dylan on the Winter Dance Party recreation tour in '99. It was a very weird pairing, Brian Setzer and Bob Dylan. But now when you think about it, Dylan didn't say what he was doing at the time. It was the 40th anniversary of Buddy Holly's ill-fated Winter Dance Party tour, which he saw a couple of days before the plane crash. So he brought along a swing rock band and like did a tour of rinky-dink towns. I saw him in Birmingham, Alabama. They played like Carbondale and Normal, just like the old Winter Dance Party on the 40th anniversary of it. And he never, being Dylan, he never said, "Hey, I'm doing the Winter Dance Party." You just had to figure it out for yourself. The fact that he covered Not Fade Away every night was a clue. Oh, Jeff, yeah, it's a recreation of the early 90s Bart shirts. But it's not from the early 90s. I gotta rewind the Benny again. Well, speaking of swing, it's a longer hangout than usual tonight. I gotta blow off some steam. Writing a book in a week is kind of takes it out of you. Spencer, I saw the Paul Bob tour too in that same year, '99. I caught it in Atlanta. I caught him in Atlanta last week, too. A week ago. Say, squirrel nut zippers, yeah. Oh, baby, in the afterlife, you could be headed for some serious strife.
Some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Now, that was a band that really just took me by surprise. I saw them, it was at Music Midtown, one of those big radio station festivals. And swing hadn't quite caught on yet. I thought they were a ska band. But then they came out and were playing like Good Enough for Granddad and stuff. Yeah, Spencer, I got the typing skills. I just got to come up with what to type. That's the trick. Catch your troubles by the toe. If it hollers, let it go. Let it fly away. You know, Jordana, I don't think I ever saw a terrible ska show. You could play ska really, really badly, and it would still be a pretty good show. You know, just bop, 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 bop. That's all it really takes, and really about all it is. It never quite got to the point where you didn't really hear a lot of good, really, like, in-depth lyrical ska songs. Most of them were about ska. Good night, Jenna. Jeff Rosenstock just put out a ska version of one of his most recent albums.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Actually, just recently, Aiden asked me what ska was, so I put on a couple of tapes. I put on like the Pie Tasters and Big Rude Jake and stuff, Less Than Jake, and he listens to the guitar. So every early 2000s Disney Channel show, the guitar was ska. Like, yeah, that's about right. Spencer, yeah, about once a week. Spencer, yes, the Stones. The mighty, mighty boss Stones. Priya, is that you, baby? Priya? Want to come be on TV? No? Okay. Priya's here, but running away. Dolores. Yes. You know, the Suits are picking up the bill would be appropriate to sing to a toddler. Like, it's me, I'm the Suits. When you're with a toddler, you are generally picking up the bill. Debbie, was I sleeping? Not lately. Not since this afternoon. Ah, some Op Ivy. Sound system gonna pick me back up, yeah. One thing that I can't depend on. All I know is that I don't know. Evening, Gary Semperfi.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation.
Op Ivy, but many of those guys went on to be in Rancid. This is like the ultimate 90s things. They went out of their way. They turned down every offer, never signed with a big label, and still got called sellouts.
Presenting the music of Benny Goodman.
We have lots of moments when you're especially proud of work you've done. Yeah, sure, I got several of them. Oh yeah, Blue Angel. Good night, Kristen. Dreaming of the Blue Angel. All right, that's it for Benny Goodman, so I think that's it for me, everybody. A quick plug for the upcoming events. Upcoming tours include Sunday morning, Gold Coast Tales. Sunday morning should also... No, I won't be finishing the book on that day. Got another day after that. Sunday noon in person at Graceland Cemetery. And then Thursday, a week from today, virtual ghost tours are coming back. So, all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Thanks especially to everybody who knew who's joined us tonight. And until tomorrow, I'm Adam. Stay safe. Stay strong. And, of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, you gotta stay